As I drive my car, I spend 90% of my time looking at the front windscreen of the car. 10% of my time, where am I looking? In the rear view mirror, side mirror, because I need to see where I come from, what's happening behind me. So it is as we do life, as we do ministry. We are forward-thinking people. Jesus said, make disciples. How are we going to do that? But there are lessons to be learned from looking back. And so let me just give you church history in 5 minutes to say some key factors in the past that have shaped, or maybe we've lost sight of in our discipling strategy today. This verse has been our signature verse as we've journeyed, where Paul talks about to the church in Galatians that his longing is to see Christ formed in his followers. Not just that they will hear about him, that they will believe him, but his passion is that they'll be formed. Followers are formed. That implies a shaping process. What are the shaping processes that we're integrating into what we're doing to see formation take place? So we look back to the scriptures. What do we learn from the God story? What do we learn from the time of Jesus? What was Jesus' priority? What was the Hebrew tradition, the Jewish tradition, the biblical tradition? And we see that spiritual formation is a high goal in the pages of Scripture. And spiritual formation largely took place through a family focus. Family focus. So who can give me a definition of family? Let's not go there. Let's not go there. Because we could debate that. The United Nations definition is 3 sentences long. So let's go back again to the Hebrew. We read family in our English Bibles. I'm not a Hebrew scholar, but I'm quoting learned people who tell us that there are many Hebrew words that we translate family in our English Bible. The 2 most common. The first of those is the word bayis, which means household. Spiritual formation in Jewish tradition in the time of Jesus and before was done through households. Primary, first, the faith-forming centre is bayis, the household, the home, and that's one expression of family. This picture of a Jewish Passover feast is a picture of bayis, people of all ages. And a Passover feast begins with a child asking the question. And then the storytellers in the bayis retell the story. People of all ages. Lovely picture. What do our bayis look like today? What role do our bayis have in faith forming in terms of creating robust disciples? Question on notice. Second word that is used most commonly is mishpachor, which means the community, which we translate family, community. Remember the story of Mary and Joseph going to Jerusalem to the festival, and when it all finished they went back home again and they forgot their son. You know, we're a parent, it happens all the time. Jeff's got 4 kids, I mean, you must forget one occasionally.
Yes, he has.
Denise's wife, yeah. I don't believe Mary nor Joseph forgot their son. They had confidence in family. They had confidence in mishpachor. They knew that someone was looking after Jesus. But after 3 days, they probably wanted to find out which uncle or aunt had him. That's how I read mishpachor. So those two working together, bayis household, mishpachor community, were the key building blocks for spiritual formation in biblical times. Mishpachor has continued on into the New Testament. Anytime I see children mentioned in the New Testament, always in generational settings. Always. Correct me if I'm wrong. The Western Church, generational settings. Come Sunday morning, children, downstairs, upstairs, out somewhere. The church has become so good at homogenising, silos, single sex, gender, age-based groups. We've lost sight of that mishpachor, community of faith. And yet these were the 2 building blocks of spiritual formation. Now, let me condense very quickly. That was largely the pattern for spiritual formation through the centuries until this major shift within our society. The sociological change of the Industrial Revolution brought about two significant factors of relevance to us today. One, because industry began, factories began, it was the decline of home industries. And so it was the beginning of the fragmentation of bayis. Mums or dads went out to work. Poor children went out to work in mines or factories. It was the fragmentation of bayis. But more concerningly, it was the disempowerment of bayis. Because no longer did parents have the time to be the spiritual, primary, faith-forming centres. In that huge sociological change, entrepreneurial young men like Robert, and my next hairstyle is going to be just like that one. Robert saw an opportunity. He said, if kids are out working Monday through Saturday, they're not learning to read and write. So let's start a school on a Sunday, let's teach them to read and write, and because he was a man of faith, let's tell them about a God who loves them unconditionally. Great idea? Of course. He had a really creative name for that ministry too. It was called Sunday School, that's right. Sunday School, yes. It's a name that we don't use today because we're very postmodern and you won't find Sundays. Or maybe you will. Anyway, that's another story. What that meant was now, spiritual formation was taken away from bayis and it was picked up by the gathered church, by Sunday school movements. Great millions of young people came to faith because of Sunday school movements. But notice what's happening. What happened is that this big picture of spiritual formation crumbled away and it was reduced to a much narrower picture of Christian education. At the same time, this broad picture of family focus, bayith and mishpah all working together, the bayith crumbled and now it was reduced to a child-focused approach to spiritual formation. So from this large picture of spiritual formation being bayith and mishpah working together, it was reduced to a much narrower focus in the process of forming disciples. Is this part of the reason we are not seeing disciples who are here to serve Jesus actively for the rest of their life? Because our process is a much more reduced and limited vision process. Many agencies at the same time saw the opportunity of child-focused Christian education. Anyone seen that logo before? Scripture Union began mid-19th century. Child-focused Christian education programs. We looked at the Boys Brigade, we looked at the Girls Brigade, Rangers, many agencies, many parachurch agencies saw the opportunity, child-focused Christian education. All good things, but where is the youth in the midst of all that? And what is the true role of mishpah in this spiritual formation? Here to Stay then, an initiative that wants to try and regain the ground, wants to reclaim that larger vision that faith formation happens primarily with bayith, working in a complementary way. The gathered church complements what's happening in bayith. Christian education and child focus are still within that, but it's part of this much larger picture. That's the ground we want to try and encourage you to start rethinking. Look in your rearview mirror. What worked then? Have we lost something in that process? Now I said we didn't have the solution, but actually we do. And so here is the solution. We've made it as simple as we can for you. So if you don't need to write it down, you can remember it. I plus F equals T. There it is. Good? Shall we go? Let's have morning tea. You right to go? Thomas Groom, back in the 70s, coined this expression, this formula as it were. And he says that for people to grow holistically, they need information. For disciples to be formed, they need information. No doubt about that. It's in the equation. But we want to contend, here to stay, that the major focus on discipling within the Christian church in the last 300 years has been on information. Let's get the stories of Jesus in through child-focused, youth-focused, segregated, homogenous programs that get this information in. And information alone is not producing the robust disciples that Jesus talked about. What is missing is F4. Follow the pattern. There's a pattern there. Formation. Formation. And Here to Stay is focusing on this. What is it that forms faith? Where it's a given that the gospel as word is going to continue to wash over our children, our young people, our young adults, and the people who sit in these gatherings. That's a given. We're not engaging with that. We want to say what has been missing is a focus on the formational aspects. What are they that really causes faith to be formed within followers of Jesus? And Thomas Broom says that when you add information to formation, what do you get? Transformation. Now, it's not just cute. We actually believe it. We want to see transformed lives who, when they hear from the creator of this universe and hear the message of the gospel, that they want their lives to be transformed, not just a flash in the pan, but here to stay. Transformation. I'm idealistic enough to add an R to the equation as well. Not only do we want transformation, we want R for... You're Anglican, not Lutheran. Reformation, yes. Aspiration. But this nation needs reformation, and it comes through the church, of which I'm a passionate believer and attender. So that's where we want to go. We want to focus between now and the break. Firstly, looking at what God is saying to us as leaders. What does the Bible say to us? And then to focus on 10 key formational experiences that we largely believe the church at large may have overlooked.